We now move to questions to the Minister for Education. I call John Stewart.
Between September 2024 and the 31st of January 2025, the Education Authority paused new referrals from schools to the Education Authority Literacy Service. This allowed the service to facilitate the prioritisation of pupils awaiting support as a result of the legacy discrepancy model of referral and service delivery. As part of the move to new local impact teams in September 24, the Education Authority removed the requirement for an educational psychology assessment prior to a request for input from any Stage 2 pupil support service. This, alongside the planned removal of the discrepancy model, will allow for increased flexibility and earlier access to support for children and young people with special educational needs. The literacy service offer has also been widened to include training and advice and guidance.
Mr. Stewart.
And I thank the Minister for his response. Primary school principals I am in contact with in my constituency tell me that it is increasingly difficult and slow to successfully get referred to the EA Literacy Support Services for pupils suspected of having dyslexia. Can the Minister give this House and concerned parents an assurance that moves towards graduated responses and local integrated SEND support teams are not just euphemisms for the dilution of reduction of services currently or up to now provided by the EA Literacy Support Service? And are these changes being properly resourced?
Sir.
Well, can I thank the member for the question, and it touches on a number of areas, but just to assure the member, the EA is reviewing literacy support in line with the new model and the graduated response framework that he mentioned. They are liaising closely with experts in the field, including a Professor Julian Elliott from Durham University, and the EA has also established a new reference group of professionals across Northern Ireland's higher education providers and the Council for Curriculum Examinations and Assessment. So there are a number of areas of work that is being undertaken to improve the situation. I think there has been some progress made that may not be being felt yet, but there are processes in place to improve this.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister to outline why the Department's literacy and numeracy strategy Count, Read and Succeed has been withdrawn?
Minister.
Can I thank the member for the question, because it's a hugely important one when it comes to what actually is taught in our classrooms, the approaches that are being taken. And we need to have a strong focus on this, in particular literacy and also numeracy, because they're the essential foundation for all education. They are essential to allowing our children and young people to succeed in their educational journey. The Count, Read, Succeed strategy was published in 2011. It contained actions and targets up to 2020, all of which are now out of date. Work to develop the strategy had commenced in 2007, and therefore the research that underpinned the guidance dated back nearly 2 decades. It was also unhelpful to have such a strategy continue to be endorsed as departmental policy. And, Mr. Speaker, there are excellent evidence now on approaches to reading acquisition, and it's clear that we need to set out clear expectations for teaching reading so that all children benefit from an evidence-based approach. The evidence is that phonics is extremely strong, and the evidence for competing models of balanced reading is, however, equally weak. So it's vital, therefore, that the teaching of phonics should be explicit and systematic across all schools to support children in learning to read. And my officials have, therefore, commenced work on a new literacy strategy for Northern Ireland, which will take account of recent international research in these key areas and sets out the support and resources that will be available to our teachers.
Guy.
Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Does the Minister accept that evidence shows that systematic phonics is the best approach to teaching literacy in schools rather than systematic synthetic phonics?
Minister.
I actually think both of them are important in terms of phonics and then the systematic use of it. I think the key question on this has been, for example, the use of cueing, which has been well documented as not being an approach that is advocated now based on international research. ITV carried out a very good investigation into Wales, which has had a really significant downturn in terms of literacy performance. Our literacy measurements in terms of PISA, benchmarking at an international level, is high in Northern Ireland because phonics is the established way in which literacy is taught. However, there are still elements of where queuing had been inferred as that being an appropriate way to do it. The evidence would show that actually queuing can undermine phonics and its use. So to answer that question, I think both are important when it comes to phonics and then the systematic use of phonics.
Stephen Dunn. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognise the detrimental consequences of gambling and the considerable impact the associated harms can have on individuals, their families and the community as a whole. In order to address this issue, it is essential to promote awareness among our children on the dangers of gambling-related harm. This strategy is fundamentally in line with the objectives of the Northern Ireland curriculum. These objectives include the promotion of critical thinking and informed decision-making, equipping students with the skills to effectively manage risks in their personal and financial situations, and addressing contemporary societal issues such as the increasing prevalence of gambling through online platforms. The Northern Ireland curriculum is structured to be dynamic, allowing for adaptability in educational delivery. Instead of mandating specific content, it empowers schools and educators to select contexts, topics and themes that best suit the needs of their students. This approach is highly advantageous as it enables the curriculum to be tailored to emphasise particular subjects while remaining compliant with statutory requirements. And within the curriculum, the topic of gambling harm is presently explored through the wider themes of financial capability, risk management and making responsible choices. While the term gambling harm is not always explicitly referenced, the curriculum includes aspects that enable students to comprehend the dangers and outcomes linked to gambling and related behaviours. Financial capability, encompassing awareness of gambling and gaming, is already established as a statutory and essential component of the curriculum. Opportunities for the teaching and learning of financial capability occur across the curriculum and through young people's everyday experience inside and outside school.
Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the Minister for his answer. Today marks Safer Internet Day. Can the Minister outline how your department works with other executive departments to ensure our young people are adequately protected from the harms associated particularly with online gambling, and how your department's actions on tackling mobile phone usage within schools can assist with this work?
Minister.
Can I thank the member for raising the issue and highlighting the importance of this week in terms of highlighting the points that he has made. Yes, working across the departments and the executive is something that we need to do, because there is a substantial impact on the far-reaching consequences of gambling harm in our society. So therefore, it requires a coordinated, multiple departments being involved. The joint approach is necessary to address the changes impacting gaming, gambling, particularly on young people. It's been well documented in various reports related to this. There was, I know members, Mr. Speaker, the publication of the Reducing Harm Related to Gambling final report of the All-Party Group, and that was published last year. I had hoped that that would prompt the Executive collectively to prioritise this significant matter and ensure the provision of requisite resources, but that has not moved at the pace at which I think members from all sides would want it to be the case. However, I can assure the House that officials continue to engage with colleagues in communities and health through the established cross-departmental working group on preventing and treating gambling-related harm. And Mr. Speaker, the member rightly highlights the issue of mobile phone technology, and many people will know when it comes to online gambling, this is a real source of concern, and any measures that we can take to reduce access to equipment that can facilitate people engaging in this type of activity, I think is something that we should welcome and support.
Hunter.
Minister, on the topic of addiction, can you please detail what your department is doing to educate our young people on alcoholism, drug addiction, and I note that drug deaths have doubled in the last 10 years, so this is very important.
Sir.
Well, again, these will be areas that we can touch upon within the curriculum, and there is room to do that. The member rightly highlights all of these things, whether it's gambling, addiction to other drugs like alcohol, and other substances. All of these things cause harm in our society, particularly to young people. And there is a place, yes, for our schools to be involved in this, but I think it is a wider societal issue. and often schools are placed with the responsibility to address a lot of wider issues. It's one of the workload related issues that teachers will say to me, that the pressures that they are placed under to engage in all of these things, whilst important, creates then that additional workload on them when we still have to be engaged in literacy, numeracy, all of the other core subjects within our education system, and we need to make sure that the primary focus of our schooling system can be on those areas, whilst we of course need to be involved in addressing these as well.
Colin Crawford.
Please.
Minister.
There were 116 pupils living in the North Antrim constituency with a statement of special education needs who were recorded as being enrolled in a specialist provision class in a mainstream school for the 2022-23 academic year.
Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his answer. Minister, can I ask what strategies are in place to ensure that these children receive the adequate resource and support they need to meet their individual needs?
Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for raising this, because I've highlighted through the special educational needs review that was completed. We have taken that information. I made a statement to the Assembly outlining how we needed to address this, and have subsequently published the details around the delivery plan associated with that, and also the resources that would be required in order to meet the need. So special educational needs has been a key priority for me from day one in taking up office, from creating an extra 1,400 places across our school system to making sure that we have the appropriate pathways and supports in place to make that change, carrying out a review of all special schools in Northern Ireland, ensuring that the operational plan 2 published by EA for area planning had a say and first approach that has prioritised meeting the needs of children with special educational needs, and there is also the funding within the transformation programme that my department has bid for, and I would anticipate this will allow us to take forward further work when it comes to transformation, which will be of assistance to those who need that help.
Pierre Ferguson.
Just in relation to specialist provision class in mainstream schools, could I ask the Minister for his assessment of the level of or number of schools across the north that would require work done to improve disabled access across all the school facility?
Minister.
Well, and she was right to raise the issue of specialist provision, and we contacted all schools seeking people to express an interest in having specialist provision. I visited one in my constituency, Carr Primary School, didn't have one, indicated that they wanted to have one, and I was able to visit again about 10 months later, and now they have an excellent specialist provision, and 8 children are getting the support that they need, and the principal has been hugely supportive of that. That has been replicated in many other examples across Northern Ireland where we're able to put in this provision. So when it comes to specialist provision, we need to make sure that it works. So what's the assistance that we provide in SPIMS? We need to be able to support the individual through self-evaluation, action plans, professional learning development. We facilitate clustering of groups. We also signpost to other services. There's a dedicated link officer. There's pre and post setup support, and we interface with all of the various different practitioners, with allied health professionals, multidisciplinary teams. So when we set up a SPIM, we need to make sure it actually works, and that requires that wider wraparound from other support to be in place. So we're already looking at what's needed for the 1st of September. Work is ongoing to make sure that we can have the appropriate placements in place, making sure that our capital criteria and requirements align with the need that we see coming forward, so that we are able to provide the placements that we need to do. But things were bad, things have improved, but they're nowhere near where they still need to be in order to meet the needs of the young people affected.
Paul Frew.
Minister, can I ask you, are you confident that you have the most up-to-date data for North Antrim?
In terms of having the data, data was received from all schools in 2023-24 from 25% for primary, post-primary and special schools. Pupil level information was not received in electronic format. For those schools who refused to submit electronically, a paper return was received. The result of that, and members will know, this was part of the action short of strike approach that was taken in some schools. People say that it doesn't have an impact. It does. It did have an impact. It continues to have an impact. The result of that was the department was unable to obtain all the necessary, usually information received electronically in terms of information around special educational needs, and it was not possible to fully undertake normal validation processes. So the data is not the complete picture. It's one of the reasons why I say to the House, action short of strike causes harm and shouldn't be supported.
Nick Matheson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In correspondence from the Minister's Department, the Education Committee recently learned that we don't seem to know the numbers of allied health professionals that are available to the education system, but in the Minister's new delivery plan for special educational needs transformation, workforce strategy does not appear to be a year one action. Will the Minister urgently undertake a workforce strategy planning in conjunction with health so that we actually know what allied health professionals are available to the education system for the children who desperately need it?
Well, Mr Speaker, the member rightly highlights the need for that wider support, one that I agree with, around allied health professionals. The provision of is the responsibility for the Minister of Health, and I have made that point. We need to have the Department of Health and the Minister supporting me and schools in order to meet the needs when it comes to allied health professionals. The member highlights the SEN Reform Delivery Plan. It was published on the 4th of February. It does recognise the need for health and education to work collaboratively to ensure that children who need to access support from AHPs, and that is well evidenced, including a number of actions to address this, including the increase of undergraduate places for AHPs, and establishing protected education posts. So my department is working closely with officials in the Department of Health and the Public Health Agency to take these actions forward.
Patsy McGlone.
Minister, supporting children with special education needs was a priority within the draft programme for government, but yet children continue to wait nearly 3 times the statutory limit for an assessment. Can you outline when your department expects to deliver an assessment for every child within the statutory 26 weeks, and is that likely to be included within the programme for government?
Well, it was consulted upon in terms of the draft programme for government around special educational needs, and I'm confident that that will be within the document whenever it is agreed. That recognises the collective approach that the Executive is taking to try and deal with these issues. Of course, that needs to be followed through in budget and resource allocations, and that will be important that is the case. The member highlights rightly the statementing process, the ability to get assessments carried out. One, that the time frame I don't believe is satisfactory, but it also points to the issue that people feel the need to actually require a statement and a legal document to get the services that they believe is required. That is symptomatic of a system that doesn't work, because what I'm trying to do is provide that support early, the assessment being carried out with some flexibility rather than a statementing process, make the intervention so that people don't need to get a statement, so that they don't need to get a legal document, because we should be meeting these needs without parents having to go down this particular route. And then there's a feeling that once you've got that, you'll get the resource, but often that isn't the case either. So there has to be a better way, and we now have a clear pathway that we can achieve that, but it will take time, it will take resource, but we know what we need to do. It's about being able to do it.
John Buchanan.
With the Speaker's permission, I'll answer oral question 4 and 10 together. I'd like to begin by expressing my sincere thanks to staff in all our schools, staff in the Education Authority, staff in NIE and members of our community who worked extremely hard, sometimes in very challenging conditions, to protect our schools' estate from the storm and subsequently to ensure that schools could safely reopen as quickly as possible. The Education Authority Maintenance Help Desk received in excess of 1,000 calls from schools reporting damage to their premises following Storm Owen. These calls ranged in severity from missing roof tiles and damaged fences to significant structural damage, On Monday, the 27th of January, 60 schools were closed. Of these 60 schools, 10 were closed due to major damage and the rest were due to power outages. And I can confirm that all schools were reopened by Friday of that week, the 31st of January, due to the tireless work of the Education Authority's maintenance teams and other agencies, including NIE and Northern Ireland Water. Significant damage has been experienced across the school's estate. The Education Authority's maintenance teams have been collating damage reports and triaging on a safety basis. Plans are well developed to address the required remedial works, which are likely to be ongoing in some schools for several weeks and indeed months. The Education Authority and the Department will continue to liaise with schools to provide support and ensure that any outstanding repairs or replacements are progressed as quickly as possible.
Mr Buchanan.
Can the Minister give any indication as to what impact this damage had for pupils and teachers?
The impact was obviously, as I've outlined, detrimental in terms of those schools that had to close. But we were able to have the vast majority open, and by the end of that week all schools were open, and schools were also seeking, where they could, to carry out some remote learning. It also highlights the need for that contingency arrangements in place for those exceptional circumstances where a school are closed, that we still need to, where we can, because obviously some schools had no electric and some homes had no electric, so very difficult to do online learning in that, and I think everybody understands that. But important that those contingency plans are in place to try and ensure that despite what was going on, there was still some level of education taking place. So yes, it was disruptive, but we were able to mitigate that disruption through the good work of those involved.
Keith Buchanan.
Speaker, Minister, can you give us a bit of an outline of indication of costs at this stage that it's going to cost your department? And has the cost been, or any indication coming from the executive to help your department to support you in those costs?
Mr.
So, I can thank the member for that question. I know the Minister for Finance did carry out an allocation of some funding that was provided to departments to help mitigate the costs, because obviously departments of education and other departments are already under acute financial pressure. But my department received a £3 million allocation towards the storm damage on the resource side. We initially, and I caveat this, we are still trying to get precise details. So this assessment is currently in the region of around £6 million is what we believe is attributable to the costs on the department from the storm, and on the capital side £2 million. But again, that is heavily caveated that we are still trying to get that information. But I have received £3 million on the capital side. I didn't receive anything, but I don't believe any department received capital allocations because there isn't the capital there currently to allocate.
McMurray.
The Minister for the answer so far. Will the Minister and his department, along with the EA, carry out formal feedback sessions with school and educational setting leaders to hear what further support and communications they feel are needed before and after major incidents and like Storm Owen?
The member for that, because like everything, whilst I believe that the department officials, the Education Authority and others carried out this response very well, and I went to meet with the staff in EA to convey my appreciation. There's always lessons that can be learned, in terms of communications. But EA did facilitate, for example, that Sunday evening, there were nearly 300 principals who were invited and came to an online briefing session from EA to provide them with that support. We were communicating support, and the feedback that I've got from many of the principals is a positive one. And I think it is important to acknowledge whenever people do good work that we recognise that, and I will always be the first to say we could do better, and there's times that I will be critical of how we operate, but this is an example where I believe the EA got it right, the department got it right, and we responded very well in what were very difficult circumstances. But there's always a review that can take place, that is taking place, to make sure how could we do things better. But I do think it's important to acknowledge this was well handled.
Justin McNulty.
I was Karen Carla, and thank the Minister for his answers thus far. Minister, has the lack of strategic management of the school's estate made school buildings more vulnerable to events like Storm Owen?
Well, It takes me into the territory of, I'll reference the Northern Ireland Audit Office report, the underinvestment in our school estate, the need for much higher levels of investment, the bids that I make, which are much greater than what I actually receive. So yes, I agree in general. There needs to be much better investment in the school estate. We can only invest what we have, and what we have is inadequate. But do I believe that in some of these occasions, the structural damage that occurred, which was significant, was a result of underinvestment in a particular school structure? I don't have that evidence at hand based upon this report. When a tree comes down and goes through a roof of a building, which I've had some footage shared with me in that respect, very difficult to say 90, 100 mile per hour winds. Was there a way that could have been avoided had there been more investment in the school? I think it would be unfair for me to say yes to that answer, because I don't have that evidence to show in these circumstances that schools suffered damage as a result of underinvestment. But the point, on a general level, I agree with the member, there has been underinvestment and that needs to change.
Cathy Mason.
Number 5, Liddell.
The 2024-25 package of measures for parents and providers that I announced to the Assembly on the 23rd of May continues to be successfully implemented, including a major expansion of preschool education provision. I announced at that time my intention that an additional 100 preschool settings and 2,000 places would transition to deliver a full-time preschool education place from September 2025, with more to follow in successive years. I have now approved 106 settings to transition to the standardised session length, enabling over 2,500 additional children to have access to a full-time place from September 2025. The Department and the Education Authority are currently in the process of supporting these settings to prepare for successful transition, and this work is on track. Simultaneously, the programme is turning attention to the work of identifying and supporting the next cohort of settings to transition to the standardised session length. The EA will be issuing an online survey to all part-time funded preschool providers between February and March to refresh the state of readiness data used to identify settings suitable for transition. And I'll be in a position to set a further ambitious target for the programme for September 26 once the available budget is confirmed and analysis of the updated state of readiness data is complete. It's important that we recognise the positive and lasting impact that this will have on the lives of thousands of our children, many of them not yet even born. We are embarking on the biggest expansion of preschool education in a generation, and with the support of my executive colleagues, I'm determined to see it through.
Mrs. Mason.
And thank the Minister for that information. Minister, and I have written to you about this as well, we have been contacted by some principals from preschools that feel that they are now at a disadvantage. They're in competition with other preschools in the area that can offer more hours than them. How do you plan to support them in the short term prior to this next rollout?
I absolutely understand the representation that the member has received. I have received that as well. I think it is recognition of what we are able to do as an executive with the resource that's available. And I would love to be in a position to bring more in. That comes with a cost implication. Some of the settings, as we develop this, will require capital investment to actually increase their physical capacity. But what I think we shouldn't do is hold everybody back until everybody is ready to move at the same time, because this will take a number of years before we do that. So where we've had the opportunity to make part-time provision, which is 12.5 hours, increasing that to 22.5 hours into full-time place, that's the right approach to take. I welcome the support of the Executive and the funding that has allowed me to do that, but I want to bring so many more settings in line to provide a full-time place, but that is subject to finance. But for some, it'll also be subject to them being in that state of readiness, which will include capital investment to actually increase the physical size of their buildings. And we also need to staff it, so we need to be able to have the staff that are available to actually provide those additional hours that we want to make everybody full-time.
Move to topicals. Call Cara Hunter.
Minister, last week in this building there was an incredible Irish language event which I was disappointed your permanent secretary or deputy secretaries could not attend. One of the key issues highlighted was that children within the Irish medium sector who have special educational needs weren't receiving and cannot currently receive special educational needs support in their own language. Minister, do you think that this is a problem, and do you think this is an issue with equality?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the member for the question? I and colleagues will know this, receive a huge amount of invitations, and I just can't be everywhere all at the one time. But I seek to make myself available, and I think most members in the chamber, if they look at it fairly, will say that I do make myself available and attend as many settings and take up invitations as I can. But the member raises an issue in terms of some of the recommendations that were raised and published in respect of that. And I do accept there are issues in terms of providing enough resources for those that want to have their education through the medium of Irish. I also recognise that whenever it came to reductions in staffing for going into training colleges, the one area that did not have a reduction for people being able to go into training colleges was those who participate in the Irish medium. So I think that recognises the efforts that the department has made in the past to support the Irish medium sector, and I certainly am happy to continue to provide that support whenever the requests come through.
Ms. Hunter.
Speaker. Minister, you'll be aware the Good Friday Agreement states that we need to both facilitate and encourage the growth of the Irish language. In your term in this mandate, on a scale from 1 to 10, how well would you say you're serving the Irish medium sector and the Irish language?
10, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister. Could I ask the Minister for his assessment of nursing provision at Knockhaven Special School?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we held a meeting with a number of principals to do with Knockhaven and others in terms of the pressures that they face around allied health professionals, nurses within that, and certainly the principal of Knockhaven, and I have every sympathy and indeed support for her position around it, that they need to be supported with appropriate health care because they're dealing with very complex medical needs within the school setting, as are other principals and teachers across special schools. And I don't think it is satisfactory in terms of the withdrawal of services that principals have brought to my attention from the health service and decisions that have been taken by trusts to withdraw them from those special schools. I believe they should be enhanced, not reduced.
Mr. McMurray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that, and it is positive. You referenced the health trusts and the review going on there. Would you commit with engaging with principals and parents, such as schools as Knockhaven, to ensure that any changes in provision reflect the views of the most affected by the withdrawal of these nurses from the special schools?
Well, and I'll continue to engage, but just to assure members, there is work between my department and the Department of Health on this particular issue. I've asked for that to be looked at. They are engaging on it. And I know the members' colleagues have had an interest in this. They've met with me, so they can testify to the work that has been ongoing. But I also recognise there has been frustration as they have sought to get answers, to try and get information. I've had to get involved in order to help get that information. So there needs to be that collaboration. There needs to be that recognition that support is required. And whenever a young person that has significant medical needs is already in a school, typically a special school, that is the place to provide them with their medical support. Rather than having to take them out of a school, take them to a hospital appointment, the transport that's involved, the disruption that takes place, school is a good place for those children and young people to receive the care that they need. But I also recognise that principals and teachers feel very vulnerable, that when incidences occur, and they do, and when things happen, that they don't feel they've got the support that they need because they're not medical experts, and therefore there needs to be better support for those schools, in particular special schools, when it comes to the medical needs of the young people that they ultimately are there to educate.
Jill Guy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Minister, can you provide an update on negotiations with teaching unions around teacher pay and workload?
I thank the member for the question. There has been a period of what were intense negotiations during January, and as the financial circumstances for my department were crystallising and work was taking place to identify the resource that we would need, I was pleased that those negotiations concluded with management side being able to make a formal offer and the trade union representatives agreeing to that. They took it to their executive committees, the trade union executive committees for each agreed to it, and then they sought, through consultation with their members, feedback, and it's now well documented, the feedback that came through, which unions have characterised as misrepresentation on social media, hysteria on social media, that led to a negative outcome of their processes in consulting. So I have been supportive of management side in trying to reach a resolution, because I'm the minister that secured an over 10% pay increase for all teachers last year, that increased new recruits graduating on a starting salary of not £23,000 but £30,000, so that they would be able to have a 24% increase. I also identified funding in my department, which has been very difficult working with EA, to facilitate a £48 million offer of 5.5%, which is well above inflation, which is in line with what counterparts in England received, albeit terms and conditions for teachers are not the same in England, so it is not a straight comparator like for like. But I want our profession to be properly paid, to receive that fair pay, and yes, I was disappointed that when it came to the unions engaging with their own members, they weren't able to get the consultation response that was positive. But work should continue to allow a resolution to come to conclusion on this.
Mrs. Guy.
Thank you, Minister. You said that work should continue on this, and I agree. If the unions are willing to come to the table now, as they have indicated, would you ask the management side or encourage them to also get around the table as soon as possible so that we can get this over line to the benefit of everyone?
It doesn't require me to ask for that. The management side have already asked for that. We also, in terms of the management side, offered to go to the Labour's Relations Agency to help mediate if that was helpful. So management side are making every effort. They are available. They've said they're available. There is no inhibitor for that. The unions are indicating that they need time to reflect on the outworkings of the process that they had. So I would hope that we can reach a conclusion as soon as possible on this, because what was secured at 5.5%, everyone has recognised is significant. We also identified workload is an issue. I absolutely understand the frustrations that teachers have, that they are being bogged down in bureaucracy and being distracted from being able to do what they want to do around education. I am up very much for trying to deal with all of that. That's why there were various commitments entered into with clear timelines to address workload-related issues. So I would appeal to the trade unions, come forward with how you feel you need to take this deal away again to your members in order to get a more positive outcome, because what is on the table is significant in terms of pay. It will lead to a recurrent expenditure of £83 million next year. At a time whenever we are under huge financial pressure, I have prioritised teachers' pay because it's the right thing to do, but we also then need to allow the commitments around workload to be taken forward. But we can't have this period of action short of strike. Members just need to look at the corrosive impact it has had on our school system for many years, and we need that period of industrial stability. That will allow all of these things to be taken forward, whilst also delivering a significant pay increase for teachers.
Minister, can I ask you for an update on the Ardnashee site in Derry, given that the new build, which is currently underway, is already too small for the current enrolment at the school?
I'm going to thank the member for the question, because I've been to Ardnashee. Hugely impressive, the work that is taking place within the member's constituency. It was part of the announcements whenever we were looking at special schools and the capital needs, that Ardnashee would be developed to obviously extend the site because as soon as it opened it was no longer capable of meeting the needs. So Ardnashee is one of those schools that I've taken that decision that requires the new build to be built beside it, and that work is ongoing in order to try and deliver that, but it is absolutely a priority scheme for the department.
I thank the Minister for his answer and for his commitment to that. Can I ask him two things? Firstly, to provide a time frame for this, and secondly, on the broader query, there are quite a number of schools which we've seen in the same predicament, and how can the department work better on future planning to ensure that when we see an increase in school numbers, that that's reflected in any planning and in any future planning for those schools?
Well, I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, to give the member a written update in terms of where we're currently at in terms of the processes, the time frame that we're working to. But he raises that important point that the forward planning, identifying the need and how we align the school estate to meet that need is a piece of work which I commissioned to take forward. EA has been carrying out that assessment of all special schools, but whilst they were carrying that work out, I recognised that Ardnashee needed to get the go-ahead to allow this work to start. So in advance of that work taking place, I have approved Ardnashee as I have Knockevin, and work continues to try and identify the site for Knockevin. But the operational plan for children with special educational needs, they have been prioritised in that within the Education Authority. That is where the priority capital spend has been going, £51 million spent in this current financial year to meet the needs of children with special educational requirements. And that will continue to be the case because these are the most vulnerable. And if we can't help the most vulnerable who are most in need, then I think we're failing them. And I'm very much of the view that it has to be a send-first approach. It's the approach that I take.
Alton Buckley.
Thank you, Speaker. On the 31st of January, the Belfast Telegraph reported that a school in Londonderry was awarded £710,000 following a meeting with DUP ministers, implying some form of impropriety in the process. This allegation was repeated on social media and indeed by some members in this chamber. So can I ask the Minister, in light of the fact that this record has been corrected, can the Minister outline, has there been anybody come forward to retract these harmful slurs on not only the Minister but indeed the school?
Can I thank the member for that? The answer to this question is no. Nobody in this House has yet apologised for the misrepresentation of this particular scheme. People ask the question, why is there a lack of confidence and trust in these institutions when it comes to decisions that are taken? Well, there's a lack of confidence and trust whenever members deliberately misrepresent the facts. And I think they do need to reflect on the approach that they have taken on this particular school. They owe an apology to that school. The Education Committee owes an apology to that school. I went and spent 2 hours to talk about children with special educational needs, all of the issues within our education system, and for 90 minutes, the Education Committee prioritised an investigation, if you want to call it that, into one school of £700,000. And not one member who have criticised this particular issue have highlighted the glaringly obvious contrast with non-controlled schools receiving exactly the same, some nearly identical levels of funding for the exact same provision, but they're not controlled, they're non-controlled. I think it's pretty obvious what the motivation has been whenever it comes to this particular issue.
Mr. Buckley.
I thank the Minister for his clarity on that matter. And with that in mind, in relation to the Minister's closing comments, is he aware of any similar media or political focus on the decision to fund a pitch in the maintained rather than the controlled sector in Foyle in recent years?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I highlighted this issue whenever I was responding to the statement that I brought to the Assembly last week. And it is notable that, having put on the record that there was funding provided in the Foyle constituency to a maintained school, a Catholic maintained school, nobody has picked that up from those who then subsequently asked questions at the Education Committee. And not only I, But the school and other principals in the control sector who I have spoken to from this story broke out, they're asking themselves, why is it that the control sector and this school have been singled out, when they were all pointing to me examples in their own communities where funding went in to non-controlled schools. And they are concerned around the focus because they believe, as I do, politically motivated with a sectarian agenda. That is what it's about. That is the purpose. And the Alliance Party have a particular problem with the control sector because they are obsessed with one sector alone, the grant-maintained integrated sector. That is their preferential treatment. No concern about Fresh Start funding that give preferential treatment to the tune of hundreds of millions of pounds to the integrated sector. They're allowed preferential treatment, but how dare a control school get the crumbs from the table of £700,000 and better not point out similar funding for identical projects in other sectors. Those members who have used this need to apologise, not to me, but to the school.
That brings to a conclusion questions to the Minister for Education. Members will take their ease. We move to the next item of business.